But weapons are evolving faster than our ability to defend ourselves. Now, there are tens of thousands of people who know how to professionally kill using drones. Stopping that kind of attack is harder than stopping any gun, knife, or bomb.
All right, so Volodymyr Zelensky told global leaders this week at the UN General Assembly that the world is in the most destructive arms race in human history. Zelensky also warned the war is coming to Europe. Now, earlier this month, Russia sent multiple unauthorized drones into Poland's airspace. Poland and NATO forces shot several of them down. This was the first time NATO made movement using military action in the war. Since then, though, Estonia and Romania have also reported Russia jets flying into their airspace. For more on this, I'm joined by William Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Also with us, Yuri Sak, who is a former advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. So a lot of interesting things happened this week with regard to this war. Bill, let me start with you. President Trump said that he thinks Ukraine could win back all the territory lost to Russia. That's a pretty big shift from Trump's, repeated calls for Kyiv to make concessions. What do you make of that? And do you think that Ukraine can actually win the war, which is probably what would have to happen, right?
That is what would have to happen. And that's what President Trump said. He said Ukraine can win this war with adequate support from the Europeans and from NATO. And that's the key. That's the key, Rob. Yes, Ukraine can win. Ukraine has demonstrated it can push the Russians way back, even with the limited amount of weapons that they had at the beginning of this big war in 2022. The Ukrainians were incredibly effective against the Russians, and the Russians were incredibly ineffective against the Ukrainians. But it is going to require the kind of resources that President Trump was talking about, that is economic and military resources. As President Zelensky just said, they need the weapons. If they've got the resources, if they've got the weapons, if they've got the financial support, they over time could take this back.
He certainly seems more open to that, President Trump, as he has in the past. He basically said, well, you're kind of on your own, and then he'd go back and forth. But this was pretty definitive. Yuri, this week the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which is known as NORAD, detected Russian aircraft operating in the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. It did not enter U.S. or Canadian airspace. Got close. What do you make of this? Is Putin trying to kind of snub or put his finger in, Trump's eye or test him? What's going on here?
Rob, first of all, I'd like to say that it's really great news to hear such a big shift coming from Donald Trump, because, it took a long way from Ukraine doesn't have cards to Ukraine can win the war and reclaim all of our territories. But as for these incursions, and of course we have seen Russian drones in the Polish airspace, we have seen their jets in the Estonian airspace, we have now reports about these air incursions in or above Alaska. So I think what is happening is Russians are trying to escalate, and they've always been banking on fear. So they want our allies to be afraid, and essentially the objective number one for the Kremlin with all these incursions is probably to stop our Western allies from supporting Ukraine. But as Donald Trump said, Russia is a paper tiger, which is banking on fear. So we must, hold our ranks, stay united, because Russian economy is in bad shape, and we need to use the momentum. We will do what we have to here in Ukraine with our deep strikes, with our new technology, with our innovative drones, and of course our allies will support us, and together we will bring peace, just peace.
So, Trump also made it clear that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they get into NATO country airspace. And NATO has come out saying that they're prepared to do it. Ambassador, what would Russia's counter be if NATO actually took out one of its fighter jets? Russia said that would be an act of war. Interesting. They go into someone's airspace, they get shot down, and that's an act of war. But what do you make of the saber rattling?
Correct, Rob. If they attack NATO, NATO will shoot them down. That's the right answer. And we've got a NATO member. We have some experience. There's a NATO member, Turkey, who had Russian jets come into Turkey's airspace back in 2015 And Turkey shot it down. Turkey shot down the Russian aircraft, jet aircraft, my fighter aircraft that came into its airspace. And what did Russia do? They huffed and puffed and then backed off. That's exactly what would happen this time. That is, knowing that NATO is ready to shoot them down, and that will deter Putin from doing this crazy act. And if he does do a crazy act, his pilots will die.
Yuri, do you think Trump can broker a deal between Putin and Zelensky? Are we past that, or do you think it's still possible?
Well, we are confident that if anyone can facilitate this peace process and exert leverage to force Russians into signing first a ceasefire and then hopefully a peace deal, it's Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump has the necessary economic power and leverages which he can use to make it impossible for Russia to prosecute that war on a level of intensity that they're doing it now. So I will just repeat that, of course, we will, as Ukrainians, we will continue to defend our land, and we will continue to innovate and build up our own defense industry to make sure that we can resist. But at the same time, we believe that Donald Trump and the United States of America are, historically placed perfectly to broker this deal, to force Russia into signing this deal, and to reestablish peace on the European continent.
Yuri, good to see you. Ambassador, thanks always for your expertise.
Thank you, Rob.